Hey everyone, so this is the Patreon AskGN. If you didn't notice, the set has changed. So in the AskGN proper, I noted towards the end, I think, that it might be the last video we film without a shelf behind me. Well, there's a shelf behind me now. So that's there. Do a tool wall at some point, hopefully to my right, for the teardown setup. And I think we're going to straighten up some LEDs in here, like maybe just white, to provide some underglow to the shelf because it's a little dark, I think. So that'll be cool. My goal is to keep test equipment behind me, mostly stuff that we actually use on a daily basis, and it'll be more interesting than product boxes, things like that. Plus, it's functional. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But that's what we have for now. So first question, this is the Patreon AskGN. As always, post them in Discord if you want me to answer them. First one's from Bruman, who says, I'm looking at getting an 8700K, then delidding it. On your delidding videos, you tell us to carry the CPU carefully and horizontally after liquid metal is applied and the IHS is back in place to prevent spilling. Does this warning still apply after the CPU is in place and the CPU cooler is installed on top? Do I have to keep the CPU horizontal even after a full build, or is the pressure of the cooler enough? So, no. You only need to carry it carefully and horizontally if you haven't sealed the IHS and if you're transporting it. So if you've sealed the IHS with crazy glue or something like that, super glue, whatever, in the corners, then it's fine. You can kind of use it, move it around like normally, because the concern is really just if there's liftoff between the IHS and the die, because the surface tension of the liquid metal from the two opposing surfaces will break, and then you end up with sort of splotchy patches where there could be missing liquid metal, or even simpler is if you're just carrying it and you slip a little bit and the IHS slightly moves, because then it'll obviously move the liquid metal around as well. So yeah, just either seal it in the corners, or once you mount it in a socket, you don't even need a cooler on it, it's fine. So if you're like, I'm not going to use this CPU for a little while, just find a motherboard, mount it in the socket, latch it down, and you're good to go. You can carry it however you want. Next question, AsRockUnpredictableReferenceCard says, what's the most annoying process of hardware reviews? Probably when things don't go as planned in terms of testing. So most annoying thing would be like game releases. I used to test game releases at midnight as they came out every single time a game came out. And although that's fun and very competitive and things like that, the downside is you can get through 6 hours of testing. So you've been up an entire day now, start at 12 a.m., get kind of done with the testing at 6 a.m., start writing everything, and then a driver comes out. Then you have to make a judgment call, and generally it involves at least retesting some cards to see if there's a change. And if it looks like there is, and there often is, then basically you have to retest everything. So that, I would say, is the most annoying. Or when getting early hardware, a lot of the companies now, they push hardware out to us way too early, but it's not because we only get some of the stuff like a week before you all see the reviews, sometimes days. So it's not that much different from when they push it to retail. I guess it's more a factor, less of pushing it to press too early and more of just pushing the product out too early. But what's annoying is get it in and get a last minute BIOS update like the day before review embargo lift, and then you have to validate everything. So I would say that's certainly the most annoying, especially if you actually want to retest everything, which sometimes it's not necessary, but it's kind of depends on the scenario. Next question, Inversion says, what I observed with your case test methodology is that you often use stock, no front panel, and reconfigured fans. For curiosity's sake of some viewers who potentially may buy a fan pack for their case, would you consider a standard set of case fans in a typical push-pull configuration? For example, 3120 intake, 2120 top exhaust, things like that. We've considered it. The problem is not every case is designed the same. So cases, as I've said in the past, are the least scientific testing approach to anything, because everything we do is based on our test configuration. You could change the dynamic a lot just by putting in a blower card or just by putting in a CLC. So everything changes. So you can make pretty informed decisions by just going with air and not introducing liquid, which also diminishes the significant differences case to case, which is another reason we don't use liquid. But also, mounting stuff in the same place is a problem, especially with liquid coolers, CPU liquid cooler or something, because maybe you can mount it in the top in one but not in the other. Then you have to front or rear mount it. That changes all your numbers to a point where they're not directly comparable. Same thing with fans. If we say we're going to do 3 front intake fans for everything, then every case we test better have 3 front intake fan options. Otherwise, it's not going to be directly comparable. You could say we'll do 1 intake and 1 exhaust, but what if we test a case where the optimal configuration is a top intake or something like that, or a bottom intake? Basically, you get into a point where you're trying to give every case the best opportunity to perform its best, but also standardize things. So we basically said, let's just do it stock. Just everything stock. And then we can do extra fan tests when it makes sense. Like with the Meshify C, it made sense, didn't really come with any fans, so we added fans, and we tend to use the Noctua NFA14 for our semi-standard extra fan testing. Something we might do more with in the future when we revise everything, I don't know. But there are good reasons to not do it right now, and it's that standardizing, it's hard. And if it's not exactly the same every time, then it's sort of pointless, because at least with stock, we can always point to it and say, this is how you buy it, so this is how we're testing it. White Chicken says, what is the performance difference between something like the NZXT G12 and a full water block for a water cooling GPU? Performance difference is going to depend on things like the pump and the radiator and the fans, but let's just assume that everything's like a 120 radiator, similar style pump, and the same fans. That shelf's closer to me than I thought. And so you assume all those things. What it comes down to is cooling the VRMs and things like that. So we previously did testing of a Gigabyte WaterForce Extreme GTX 1080 card, and that card had higher GPU core temperatures, and so did the EVGA FTW hybrid, FTW3 hybrid. They had higher core temperatures than some of their cheaper counterparts, and what I really tried to explain to everyone was the reason for that was because those blocks, it's closed loop, but the block on the card was going over VRM components, or in the very least, it was just like the pump was centered on the GPU like normally, and that contacted copper plates that go out to the memory and go out to the VRM. So the memory performance is better, the VRM performance is better, and the GPU diode looks worse because it's sharing its cooling solution with other components around it. So you have a higher heat load, higher heat density going into the same copper cold plate ultimately, which means that if you're only measuring GPU temperatures, it's sort of flawed, because all you're doing is showing that the GPU temperature is higher on the thing that's soaking more heat into the same liquid cooler. So to answer the question of what's the difference is if everything's the same otherwise, a full block might look like the GPU is warmer because it's cooling other stuff than the GPU, like the VRM. And that's not a bad thing. It's good to cool the VRM, it's good to cool the memory. So if you have issues with those being too hot, then a water block would fix that. Or you get a better, bigger radiator, faster pump, and fix all of it. But otherwise, no big difference other than that. Next question, Durio says, hi Steve, any reason you haven't reviewed the Corsair Air 740 case in detail? From the outside, it looks like something right up your street, high airflow, dual chamber, etc. I don't know where the fascination with this case has come from recently. It's from 2016. I've probably gotten like 5 tweets, 2 messages on Patreon, and at least 1 email in the last week about it. So I don't get what the deal is, but the case is from 2016, so we're probably not going to review it. It just would not be worth it. We didn't review it at the time because Corsair didn't send us one, is what it comes down to. I think we were probably testing whatever else. I think they had the 570X and the 270R come out around that time, and the 460X, I think. So we were probably testing those things. Never tested the Air 740, and probably won't, because at this point it's too old. But if they come out with a revision or a follow-up, we'll look at it. The difference is, in 2016, I didn't have as much manpower to do a bunch of case reviews like we do now. So I just didn't have the time, and it wasn't sent anyway. metalshark says, if you need a 2mm thermal pad, do you lose efficiency using 2 1mm thermal pads stuck together? Yes, definitely. Anytime you have a multiple transfer media stacked on top of each other, you're going to lose performance. It's the same idea, like the more layers, we talked about this with the Nintendo Switch teardown, the more layers of paste to like metal to paste to metal that you have, the worse the performance is going to be. Ideally, you limit it to one medium to go through. So it would be ideal to just get two, or a 2mm pad rather than two 1mm pads. I've stacked pads though. We did it for the Zotac 1080 Ti that needed some help, and performance was still better than not having them at all, which is how they shipped it stock. So it'll still work. It's just it'll be more efficient to do it with a single one. But in a pinch, it's generally fine unless you're doing something really extreme. I don't really see a reason why it would be a problem. So that's it for this one. As always, post them in Discord if you want to leave questions for the next AskGN full episode or this one. And we're going to be working on this more. There's still more to do with the shelf, but it's a start. We really needed something functional that could store stuff because we ran out of space, but also hopefully it'll look kind of cool when we're done. So that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.